May thy servant Camilla, who wears this crown, be filled by thine abundance.
The announcement lasted only a few seconds, but its meaning struck the palace like a thunderclap. Prince William had appointed Carole Middleton to the Royal Foundation Board, and before the ink had even dried, several figures closely connected to Queen Camilla were removed from influential positions. It was not presented as a confrontation. There were no raised voices, no public accusations, and no warning. Yet behind the carefully chosen language stood a decision powerful enough to redraw the monarchy's inner circle. Before we go deeper into what this really means for the royal family, make sure to subscribe so you don't miss a single update. William sat alone moments before the announcement, staring at the appointment letter he had deliberately turned face down. The Royal Foundation, his central charitable organization for directing public projects, partnerships, and the values that would shape his future reign, had become more than a platform for good causes. It had become a test of control. Whoever sat around that boardroom table would help decide which voices reached the future king, which priorities received support, and which relationships survived the transition into a new royal era. Catherine stood near him, sensing the weight behind his silence. He knew appointing Carole Middleton would be described as a family favor, perhaps even the beginning of a private Middleton court. Yet the prince trusted his mother-in-law because she had remained steady when palace relationships became uncertain. She had protected his wife without demanding status, influence, or reward. Now he was asking her to step into a position where every gesture would be questioned. William finally looked at Catherine and asked whether she was prepared for what would follow. The princess did not hesitate. "We already know what follows when nothing changes." Her answer settled the final doubt. He lifted the letter, signed the authorization, and allowed the decision to move through the foundation's formal channels. Camilla received the revised board list beside an untouched cup of tea. An aide placed the document before her, then quietly stepped back. She read Carole's name first. Her eyes then moved to the advisors removed beneath it. Individuals whose influence had grown through years of access to her household. The queen consort lowered the page slowly, but she did not speak. Each erased name felt like another thread being cut from the network that had protected her position. Charles had seen the decision before it became public. The king neither stopped his son nor offered open support, leaving senior courtiers uncertain whether his silence meant approval, exhaustion, or surrender. That uncertainty deepened when one dismissed advisor sent Camilla a recorded private message containing only 5 words. "He has chosen his side." But to understand why Carole's name carried such explosive force, the palace first had to confront the personal histories and wounded loyalties hidden behind every seat at that table. This was never simply a board appointment. It was the collision of 3 women whose lives had become inseparable from the future of the crown. Catherine stood between duty and family. Carole entered a royal institution that had once viewed her as an outsider. And Camilla watched another maternal figure gain the access, trust, and proximity she had spent years securing. Beneath the official statements, each woman understood the same truth. This decision was about belonging, and who would shape William's monarchy. Catherine felt pride rise beside an unease she could not dismiss. Her mother had been the steady hand behind the family during periods when royal pressure became almost unbearable, supporting her daughter and grandchildren without demanding recognition. Carole had offered something the palace could rarely provide: normality without conditions. Yet the princess knew the appointment would change how every act of support was judged. People would no longer see only a mother protecting her family. They would see a woman entering the structure surrounding a future king. Carole stood beside the kitchen table with the appointment papers still sealed. Adelaide Cottage, the family home William and Catherine used for a quieter life near Windsor, had always felt separated from the machinery of royal power. That evening, however, the envelope made the palace feel impossibly close. She ran her hand slowly across its surface, while her daughter watched in silence. "Once I sign this, they will never see me as only your mother again," she whispered. William did not soften the truth. He told her the seat would not be ceremonial, meaning it would carry real responsibilities rather than exist merely as a public symbol. The prince wanted her involved in family programs, donor accountability, and the decisions that shaped the foundation's direction. Carole immediately warned that she would not accept a role created only to embarrass Camilla or send a threatening message through the palace. He answered that the appointment was about trust, not revenge, and that genuine authority would come with strict responsibility. Camilla felt the contrast more painfully than anyone understood. She had spent decades surviving rejection, public anger, and resistance inside the royal system. The advisors removed from William's circle were not simply professional contacts to her. They were among the people who had stood near her when acceptance seemed impossible. Watching Carole gain influence through family devotion felt like seeing another woman receive naturally what she had fought years to secure. The tension deepened because William's concern reached beyond personal loyalty. Private recommendations had begun reaching the Royal Foundation Board through unofficial palace channels. The Foundation, the charitable organization used by the prince and princess to lead major public projects, was becoming vulnerable to competing agendas. He feared that private relationships were beginning to influence decisions meant to serve the public. Catherine finally admitted that his distrust had not started with the latest removals. During a recorded private family conversation, she reminded her mother that everything had changed after one royal ceremony, when confidential information about her personal condition had been used to pressure William. Carole looked toward the unopened papers again. She now understood that this appointment had not begun with ambition. It had begun with betrayal. And the moment that changed William's mind had occurred months earlier, beneath the polished surface of a ceremony that appeared perfectly united to the outside world. The decision had not begun in a boardroom. It began beneath cathedral lights, surrounded by cameras, uniforms, and rehearsed smiles. During a major royal service, William discovered that a confidential discussion concerning Catherine's future workload had been circulated among advisors who had no authority to receive it. The betrayal was quiet, almost invisible. But when one of Camilla's closest allies used that private information to challenge William's plans, the prince realized that family vulnerability had become palace currency. William had barely left the Commonwealth Thanksgiving service when Sir Malcolm Harwood approached him inside a private robing chamber. The service, held at Westminster Abbey to honor the nations linked through the Commonwealth, had presented unity to the public. Behind closed doors, however, the senior foundation advisor spoke with the confidence of a man who believed he knew more than he should. He referred directly to Catherine's reduced schedule and to plans for shifting several responsibilities while she recovered and focused on her family. The prince removed his ceremonial gloves and placed them sharply on a wooden table. Only Catherine, Carole, Charles, and a tightly restricted medical planning group had been told about the proposal. That group existed to coordinate health needs, family duties, and public commitments without exposing private details. William looked directly at Harwood and asked, "Who told you about my wife?" The advisor hesitated. It lasted only a moment, but the silence confirmed everything. Harwood tried to recover control. He warned that reducing certain programs would upset people whose support the crown still requires. The words cut deeper than the leak itself. This was no longer about protecting charitable work. Catherine's private condition had been turned into pressure, and her recovery had become a bargaining tool for men fighting to preserve their influence. Catherine found him later in a quiet corridor, still carrying the anger he had refused to show in public. She blamed herself, saying her reduced workload had created the opening for conflict. William stopped her immediately. He told her that protecting her was not weakness, and that silence would no longer be mistaken for permission. The princess heard the finality in his voice. He was no longer deciding whether to act. He was deciding how far the response would go. The warning became darker when a handwritten note reached him through a documented internal account. It listed 3 people connected to Camilla's circle and recorded that they had discussed Catherine's confidential proposal before the ceremony. The exchange appeared coordinated, not accidental. Someone had allowed private family information to move through palace channels, and the future king now believed the leak had been used to block his restructuring plans. William folded the note and kept it hidden. He did not show Charles. He did not confront Harwood again. He waited until the evidence pointed toward the one person whose household connected every name on the page. Camilla was already inside Clarence's house, unaware that the private breach had become the point of no return. The next conversation would not take place through advisors, letters, or carefully worded statements. William would carry the betrayal directly to Camilla's door. There were no secretaries in the room, no courtiers taking notes, and no official record of what followed. William entered Clarence's house carrying the handwritten evidence, while Camilla waited beside the fireplace with the expression of someone who already understood the accusation. He did not begin with pleasantries. He placed the note on the table between them and demanded to know why private information about Catherine had reached her allies. For several seconds, the Queen said nothing, and that silence became the confrontation's first answer. Camilla finally looked down at the names written across the page. Clarence's house was her official London residence with Charles, but in that moment, it felt less like a royal home and more like a sealed chamber where 2 versions of the monarchy had collided. She argued that informal communication had always kept the institution functioning. Advisors spoke across households, she said, because mistakes made in isolation could damage everyone. William did not raise his voice. That made every word sharper. He told her the issue was not ordinary communication. Catherine's health, workload, and family pressures had been carried into a fight over influence. The prince accused her network of treating his wife's vulnerability as leverage, turning private pain into a tool for preserving access. He refused to let anger control him, but the restraint only made the accusation feel more final. Camilla's composure cracked when he said he no longer knew where her household ended, and his father's authority began. The queen consort had spent decades fighting for legitimacy inside a family that once viewed her presence as a threat. Now she heard something even more painful, that the system she had built around herself had become impossible to separate from royal power. The admission came slowly. Camilla confirmed that Sir Malcolm Harwood had contacted her after learning about William's restructuring plans. She described the exchange through a recorded private conversation, preserved by her household secretary. He had warned that several programs could lose support, but she denied ordering him to confront the future king. Her answer proved she knew about the breach, yet left the line of responsibility hidden in shadow. William then revealed what she had not expected. He had already commissioned a formal review of the Royal Foundation's advisory structure. The review was a full examination of who held influence, how decisions were made, and whether outside palace loyalties were interfering with charitable work. Anyone serving 2 competing interests would be removed. Camilla slid the handwritten note back across the table. "You came here having already made your decision." The prince left it where it rested. "I came here to discover whether I was wrong." Her warning followed him before he reached the door. Replacing experienced advisors with members of Catherine's family would look like a declaration of war, and Charles might not remain silent once the damage reached the crown. William paused, but he did not turn around. He left Clarence's house without taking back the note, because the true power behind his decision no longer rested in proof alone. It rested in who possessed the authority to act. Camilla's allies had assumed that royal influence would protect them. They had underestimated one crucial fact. The foundation belonged to William's future, not to the old palace order. He did not need a dramatic decree from the king to reshape its board. He needed legal authority, internal support, and the will to accept the consequences. By the time the palace understood how carefully he had prepared, the votes had been counted, the documents were ready, and Carole's appointment was no longer a proposal. William moved with quiet certainty, because the royal foundation's structure gave him decisive influence over its direction. The organization was not a department of government or a branch of the crown controlled by Charles. It was the charitable platform through which the prince shaped public projects, major partnerships, donor relationships, and the values he intended to carry into his future reign. That distinction mattered. It allowed him to change the board without turning the conflict into a constitutional battle between father and son. The removed advisors would keep their titles, honors, and social standing. Their loss was more subtle and more painful. They were being cut away from the network where funding priorities were discussed. Trusted donors were introduced, and future royal initiatives first took shape. Access had been their true power. Once that access disappeared, so did their ability to steer decisions from the shadows. William still felt the weight of what he was doing. He respected his father, and he understood that several names on the removal list belonged to people who had supported Camilla when the royal family had treated her with suspicion. Yet asking Charles for permission would have allowed personal loyalty to overrule the foundation's independence. The future king could not protect Catherine's privacy while surrendering control to the very household he no longer trusted. 2 board members were expected to resist. Instead, both quietly backed the restructuring after reviewing a documented account showing how confidential details about Catherine had circulated before the Westminster ceremony. Their support changed everything. What had looked like a personal strike against the Queen's circle now carried internal authority. Carole's role also proved far more serious than critics expected. She would oversee family-focused programs, strengthen donor accountability, and help create barriers against unofficial palace interference. William had not invited her into the room merely because she was Catherine's mother. He had chosen her because she understood the cost when institutions failed to protect families. Charles read the review file alone. The king recognized every removed name and remembered how those individuals had defended his wife during her most difficult years. By the final page, his face had tightened. He removed his glasses and pressed his fingers against his forehead while an aide waited nearby. The threat appeared in the last paragraph. One dismissed advisor had warned that internal correspondence would be released, portraying the appointment as a Middleton takeover. Charles closed the file and spoke without looking up. "Bring me my son, not the Prince of Wales, my son." Yet before father and son could meet, the removals became real, and the people who had once moved freely through royal corridors suddenly discovered that their names no longer opened doors. The first consequence arrived without ceremony. Security passes were deactivated. Meetings disappeared from calendars. Invitations that had once been automatic were quietly withdrawn. For Camilla's allies, the fall was not announced by trumpets but by unanswered calls and closed doors. Inside the palace, loyalty suddenly had a measurable cost, and as the removed advisors searched for someone willing to reverse William's decision, Camilla was forced to face a reality she had spent years avoiding. Her influence could no longer guarantee protection. Sir Malcolm Harwood discovered the new order at a secured entrance. He pressed his electronic pass against the reader once, then again with growing force. The light remained red. A security officer stepped forward and quietly explained that his authorization had been withdrawn. That meant more than losing access to a building. He was now excluded from committee sessions, donor briefings, strategic meetings, and the private discussions that shaped projects connected to William and Catherine. The palace described the removals as governance renewal, a formal term for changing leadership rules and tightening how an organization is managed. Senior courtiers understood the colder truth. The restructuring had followed the breach involving Catherine's confidential plans, and every cancelled meeting carried the same message. Private family information could no longer be traded for influence. Harwood reacted with fury because access had defined his power. He called former colleagues, but several refused to answer. Others offered brief sympathy before ending the conversation. By afternoon, the advisor realized that loyalty inside the palace often lasted only as long as protection did. His anger then turned toward the woman he believed could still save him. Camilla received copies of private correspondence through a recorded call from Harwood. He warned that the letters would be released unless she persuaded Charles to intervene. The threat transformed a trusted ally into a danger. She heard desperation beneath his confidence, but she also heard betrayal. The man who had once defended her was now prepared to damage the crown to preserve his position. The Queen refused. She told him that exposing private letters would destroy the very institution he claimed to defend. Her voice remained steady, though the decision cost her deeply. For the first time, she chose the monarchy over the network that had protected her through years of rejection. Harwood ended the call without apology. Camilla closed the doors of her sitting room and stood alone. Former supporters were already distancing themselves, and she now understood why. Many had remained close because they believed she could guard their places. Once that protection disappeared, so did their devotion. She removed a brooch linked to one of her earliest royal patronages and placed it inside a drawer, as though burying a chapter of her life. Catherine approached William before he left for Windsor. She knew Charles had summoned him, and she feared what victory without compassion might create. "Do not protect me by breaking everything around us," she said quietly. The prince held her gaze, knowing the next conversation would decide whether reform became renewal or revenge. The removals had weakened Camilla's circle, but the monarchy's future would be decided in a quieter encounter, between a father afraid of division and a son determined never to repeat the past. When William entered the room at Windsor, Charles had dismissed every aide. There were no briefing folders on the table and no private secretary waiting beyond the door. For once, the conflict would not be filtered through rank, duty, or palace language. The king looked older than his son expected. William looked more resolved than his father had feared. Between them stood the same question that had divided generations of the royal family. When loyalty to a loved one threatens the institution, which duty must come first? Charles asked him to sit, but his voice carried no command. He wanted an explanation from a son, not a policy defense from the Prince of Wales, the title held by the direct heir to the throne. The monarch said the removals had wounded people who had stood beside Camilla during years of public hostility. To him, their dismissal felt less like reform and more like punishment for a past no one in the room could change. William listened without interruption. Then he explained that the foundation had to reflect the monarchy he intended to lead. Transparent, disciplined, protective of family boundaries, and free from private circles that traded access for influence. He did not deny the pain caused by the decision. He denied that pain could become a reason to preserve a broken system. Charles leaned back and admitted what he had not included in any written briefing. Camilla had refused Sir Malcolm Harwood's demand for intervention. Through a recorded private conversation shared with the king, she had also asked that no royal pressure be used to restore the removed advisors. The Queen had chosen the crown over the network that once protected her, even though the choice left her isolated. William's anger softened, but his position did not. He told his father that he was not punishing Camilla's history. He was stopping Catherine's private struggles from being exploited in the present. His voice dropped when he said he could not ask his wife to endure what earlier royal women had been forced to endure silently. The future king would not call suffering tradition simply because the palace had survived it before. Charles understood the warning. He agreed not to reverse the restructuring, but he placed one condition on his support. Carole's role had to be governed by strict rules, public responsibilities, and clear limits. Family trust could not become the same unaccountable influence they were trying to remove. The king reached across the table and placed his hand over the appointment file. Silence held between them before he pushed it toward William. "Then make certain you build something better, not merely something that belongs to you." The prince accepted the challenge. He later told Catherine and Carole that the appointment would proceed under stricter scrutiny than any other board position. Both women understood why. Reform would mean nothing if it simply replaced one protected circle with another. The decision reached the public before the family had time to breathe. With the king's resistance gone, the private struggle became a public reckoning, and one morning image would define how the entire country understood the change. By sunrise, the palace conflict was no longer private. A single photograph appeared across television screens and newspaper front pages. Carole Middleton entering the Royal Foundation's London offices, appointment folder in hand, while behind her, a removed advisor left through a separate doorway. The image required no explanation. To supporters, it represented renewal, family stability, and William taking control. To critics, it looked like an outsider entering through one door, while the old royal establishment was forced out through another. Carole stepped from the car with her face composed, but the noise around her landed harder than she expected. The Royal Foundation's London offices were the working centre for William and Catherine's charitable projects, where board members shaped funding, partnerships, and long-term public programs. That made her arrival more than a family moment. It placed her inside the structure through which the future king would define his priorities. The announcement confirmed her appointment at the same time as a wider governance restructuring. Governance meant the rules controlling how the organization was led, who held authority, and how decisions were checked. Several long-serving advisors connected to Camilla's network had been removed, and the timing made the message impossible to separate from William's larger battle over trust. Carole paused for half a second before moving toward the entrance. Cameras followed every step. One reporter shouted, "Are you replacing the Queen's people?" She stopped, turned, and answered with controlled calm, "I am here to serve the work, not to replace anyone." The reply softened the crowd for only a moment before the questions returned. Catherine watched the coverage beside William. She felt pride in her mother's composure, but fear quickly followed. The princess knew this appointment had been made partly to protect family boundaries, yet now Carole was becoming a target because of it. She asked whether they had exposed her to a level of cruelty no private citizen should carry. William admitted the truth. He had expected criticism, but he had underestimated how quickly the argument would become personal. The prince had wanted the public to see reform. Instead, many saw a family takeover. A national broadcaster sharpened the division with the headline, "William's New Court: Reform or Family Revolution?" The phrase transformed an internal board decision into a national debate about the shape of the next reign. Supporters praised him for breaking an old network of influence. Critics accused him of replacing palace loyalty with Middleton loyalty. Outside Kensington Palace, a small crowd gathered beneath the gates. One woman raised a handwritten sign reading, "Protect the family, protect the crown," while another shouted that royal roles should never become family appointments. The split was no longer hidden inside drawing rooms. It was now public, loud, and emotional. Carole entered the building, knowing that her first meeting would decide everything. Words had carried her to the door, but only action could prove whether she belonged inside. And somewhere beyond the cameras, Camilla still had one final choice to make. Her words quieted the pavement for only a moment, but inside the first board meeting, the final meaning of William's decision was about to become unmistakably clear. The final verdict did not arrive through another dramatic announcement. It emerged around a boardroom table, where Carole took her seat. William opened the meeting, and every remaining member understood that the monarchy's future had already shifted. Camilla's allies were gone. The appointment would stand. Yet this was not a simple victory for one family over another. It was the moment William accepted that leadership required boundaries. Camilla accepted that influence could not be permanent, and Charles allowed the next reign to begin taking shape. Carole opened the revised governance charter with steady hands. The charter was a formal set of rules controlling how the foundation would operate, including strict confidentiality, transparent appointments, fixed responsibilities, and clear limits on unofficial palace involvement. Every sentence carried the weight of what had happened. No private relationship would again be allowed to outrank accountability, and no family connection would be protected from scrutiny. William addressed the board without celebration. He made it clear that the new rules applied to everyone, including members of Catherine's family. The prince understood Charles's warning and knew that replacing one private circle with another would destroy the meaning of the entire reform. Carole would hold real authority, but every decision she made would be recorded, reviewed, and measured against public service. Carole then acknowledged the pain surrounding her appointment. She told the board that loyalty to Catherine had brought her into the room, but only visible results would justify her remaining there. Her words carried no triumph. She understood that several people had lost influence as she gained responsibility, and she refused to let that suffering become a reason for revenge. Camilla accepted the outcome in private. The Queen knew the removed advisors would not return, and she no longer asked Charles to challenge the decision. A documented household account recorded that she believed protecting those old loyalties would now damage the king and deepen the family fracture. Her acceptance did not erase the humiliation, but it ended the resistance. William revealed Carole's first assignment before the meeting closed. She would lead an independent family support program, serving parents and children beyond royal circles. The initiative proved that her seat was not symbolic, and that her influence would be judged by what it delivered for ordinary families. Carole later received a brief handwritten message from Camilla. "The institution is unforgiving. Serve it carefully." It was not an apology. It was not friendship. Yet the Queen Consort had chosen to close the conflict without another strike. William thanked his mother-in-law after the board members left. She remained beside her chair and warned him that the appointment must never become revenge. The future king closed the governance folder and answered, "Then this begins with responsibility." There was nothing left to reverse, and no final battle still waiting behind palace doors. The old circle had closed. A new one had formed, and William had made unmistakably clear that his future crown would be built on trust, boundaries, and accountability, rather than inherited influence. Thanks for watching. Please don't forget to like and subscribe, and we will see you in next one.